There are legends whose names survive the passing of time, and then there is Katharine Hepburn, a woman who did not simply live through Hollywood's golden age, but reshaped it with a force of will rarely seen before or after. 4 Academy Awards stand beside her name like immovable monuments, yet even they fail to capture the magnitude of the life behind them. Hepburn was not the product of a studio, nor the creation of a carefully engineered image. She was a fire that refused to be dimmed, a spirit that would not bend to expectations, and a woman who stepped into the world with unshakable certainty in who she was meant to be. Long before she became an icon, she was a girl marked by tragedy, shaped by a loss so deep it forged her into something extraordinary. The defiant independence that baffled producers, intimidated journalists, and mesmerized audiences did not come from ambition alone. It was born from a childhood shadowed by grief and strengthened by a clarity of self that few ever reach. Hollywood tried to tame her, critics tried to categorize her, and the industry even attempted to exile her. Yet every attempt to diminish her only sharpened her resolve, pushing her toward a destiny entirely her own. As her life unfolded, Katharine Hepburn would love fiercely, work relentlessly, fight silently against illness, and stand firmly against a world eager to define her. Her story is not a tale of glamour, but of endurance, not of compliance, but of revolution, not of being adored, but of refusing to disappear. This is the journey of a woman who needed no permission to become eternal. Before the world knew her as the fiercest woman to ever walk through Hollywood's golden gates, Katharine Hepburn was simply a young girl growing up in Connecticut, carrying within her a brightness that was never meant to be ordinary. Her childhood was shaped by progressive parents who encouraged independence, curiosity, and the unapologetic pursuit of truth, values that would later become the backbone of her entire identity. But beneath that seemingly enlightened upbringing lay a wound so deep it would echo throughout her life, shaping not only the woman she became, but also the armor she chose to wear. Hepburn was still a teenager when she walked into her brother Tom's room and found what no sister should ever have to see. His sudden death shattered the foundation of her world, dissolving childhood innocence in an instant and carving out a silence that followed her forever. In the days that came after, Katharine withdrew into herself, adopting a toughness that felt necessary for survival. She cut her hair short, adopted his birthday as her own, and carried his absence like a shield she both hid behind and fought with. That loss became the fire that forged her independence, the iron that would keep her standing through every storm the future would hold. From a young age, she possessed a mind that moved faster than most, a spirit that resisted confinement, and a physical energy that made her seem almost untouchable. She threw herself into sports with the ferocity of an athlete in training for war. Tennis served like arrows, cold swims that tested endurance, golfing sessions long before Hollywood ever knew her name. Her body became as disciplined as her mind, her will sharpened into something unbreakable. She did not fit the mold of a delicate young lady, nor did she try to. Instead, she built herself into something the world had to acknowledge, even if reluctantly. Despite her trauma, or perhaps because of it, Katharine found solace in the stage. Acting did not give her refuge, but it gave her space. Space to transform, to explore, to dominate a room without allowing anyone to dominate her. When she stepped into her first roles, she did so with an intensity that startled casting directors. She wasn't polished, she wasn't predictable, she wasn't controllable, but she was unforgettable, and that was enough. The early years of her career revealed a truth that Hollywood would soon come to fear and admire in equal measure. Katharine Hepburn did not arrive to conform, she arrived to challenge. In a time when studios manufactured stars with assembly line precision, she walked into auditions wearing tailored trousers, head held high, voice unapologetically firm. She questioned directors, debated producers, refused to wear costumes she thought were silly, and held herself with a confidence so unwavering that people mistook it for arrogance. But beneath the surface was not arrogance at all. It was survival, forged in the aftermath of losing the person she loved most. Her breakthrough roles only reinforced what insiders already knew. This woman was not a whisper in Hollywood. She was a storm. Her presence on screen was magnetic, her diction crisp, her stare both sharp and vulnerable. She carried an unpredictability that made every performance feel alive, as if she were rewriting the scene the very moment she played it. And audiences, though sometimes divided, could never truly look away. Katharine Hepburn did not rise because Hollywood welcomed her. She rose because she refused to let Hollywood decide her fate. And long before the world crowned her a legend, she had already become one in her own right. Katharine Hepburn's rise in Hollywood was as swift as it was startling. Almost immediately, she began collecting roles that other actresses would have killed for, delivering performances charged with a rawness and intelligence that felt almost out of place in an industry built on illusion. Her early successes confirmed what many suspected from the moment she walked onto a set. This was a woman who did not merely act, she inhabited. But Hollywood is a place that loves talent only as long as it can control it, and Hepburn was the kind of woman who made control impossible. In the 1930s, the machinery of the studio system ran with ruthless precision. Stars were expected to obey, to dress a certain way, smile on command, give the press what they wanted, and never question authority. But Hepburn questioned everything. She dismissed roles she considered unworthy. She refused to wear the gowns designed for her. She hid from reporters, gave them nothing, and spoke with an honesty that made publicists tremble. She insisted on choosing scripts, shaping characters, and debating directors as if she were their equal, something no actress of the era dared to do. Hollywood, unable to tame her, retaliated in the only way it knew. It punished her. One by one, her films began to falter at the box office. Critics grew impatient with her nonconformity. Columnists labeled her difficult, spoiled, even strange. And then, in 1938, came the blow that would have crushed almost anyone else. The infamous Independent Theater Owners Association listed Katharine Hepburn on its box office poison list, a public declaration that she was no longer wanted, no longer profitable, no longer a star. Most actors would have begged for forgiveness, surrendered to the studios, softened their edges, played the game. But Katharine Hepburn did something Hollywood never expected. She walked away. She returned to New York, far from the palm trees and polished facades of Los Angeles, to the world of theater, the only place where she felt the work spoke louder than the politics. There, she rebuilt herself from the ground up. On stage, stripped of Hollywood's glare, she rediscovered her sharp instincts and ferocious discipline. She forced audiences to confront her talent without distraction, and soon, the applause grew louder than her critics ever had. But her comeback wasn't luck, it was strategy. Hepburn found the perfect weapon to reclaim her throne. The play was written with her in mind, built around her strengths, her contradictions, her unmistakable presence. She didn't merely star in it, she shaped it. And when the time was right, she made a move no actress had dared attempt. She bought the film rights. Then she marched back into Hollywood, not as a fallen star begging for a role, but as a woman offering a studio the chance of a lifetime. The result was a triumph. The Philadelphia story was a critical and commercial success, a masterpiece that reignited her career and forced Hollywood to acknowledge what it had carelessly tried to discard. She was no longer just an actress. She was a force, a woman in control of her narrative in an era when women were rarely allowed to write their own stories. Katharine Hepburn's downfall had not broken her, it had refined her. And her rebirth was not a return to Hollywood's approval. It was the moment Hollywood finally understood that she did not need its approval to shine. If Katharine Hepburn's public life was defined by defiance, brilliance, and unapologetic strength, her private life was shaped by a very different kind of intensity, one woven with longing, secrecy, and a love that existed almost entirely in the shadows. Among all the chapters in her extraordinary life, none is more haunting or more tender than her relationship with Spencer Tracy, a story that stretched over 26 years and survived in the quiet spaces where the world was never meant to see. Their connection began on a film set, as so many Hollywood romances do. But what grew between them was something far deeper than the industry's usual flicker of attraction. Tracy was already married and deeply troubled, wrestling with alcoholism, spiritual guilt, and a restlessness he never fully understood. Hepburn, with her sharp mind and resolute demeanor, was the opposite of everything chaotic in his life. Yet somehow she became the one place where he found a strange kind of peace. He made her laugh in a way few people ever could, and she steadied him in a way no one else ever had. Their love was never simple, never easy, and never allowed to be public. Hepburn understood from the beginning that Tracy would never leave his family, and she never asked him to. Instead, she accepted the impossible structure of the relationship, living a life where her greatest love could not be claimed, celebrated, or even acknowledged outside a small circle of trusted friends. It was a sacrifice she carried without bitterness, almost as if she believed that loving Tracy quietly, completely, was part of her life's architecture. What the world saw were films filled with electric chemistry, sharp banter, and a warmth that felt almost too real to be scripted. What the world did not see were the years in between, the nights spent worrying whether he would come home sober, the silences where words carried too much weight, the joy that arrived only in fragments. She adapted her life to his rhythms, choosing presence over recognition, truth over convenience. And then came the years when Tracy's health began to fail. His body weakened, his spirit dimmed, and his inner battles grew heavier. It was during this period that Hepburn revealed the full extent of her devotion. She stepped away from her own spotlight, turning down roles, postponing projects, and rearranging her world so she could be near him. She cooked his meals, monitored his medication, kept him company through long, fragile nights. She did all of this quietly, without announcing it, without seeking acknowledgement. When Tracy died in 1967, Hepburn grieved in silence. She did not attend his funeral, a decision made not out of distance, but out of deep respect for his family, for the complicated life he had lived, and for the boundaries she had always promised to honor. Her love had been silent in life, and so she allowed it to remain silent in death. Years later, when she finally spoke about him, her voice carried both strength and ache. "I loved Spencer Tracy. He and his interests and his demands came first." It was perhaps the only time she allowed the world to glimpse what that love had cost her. Behind the legend of Katharine Hepburn was a woman who could command a stage and defy an entire industry. Yet, when it came to the man she loved, she chose tenderness, loyalty, and sacrifice. It was the one place in her life where she allowed vulnerability to exist without armor. Long before the world accepted her as an emblem of strength, Katharine Hepburn had already decided who she was and who she refused to become. Hollywood adored its polished creations, its obedient starlets shaped by studio hands and kept in place by rigid contracts. But Hepburn stepped into that world like a storm sent to disrupt its symmetry, a woman who carried her truth the way others carried fame, boldly, unapologetically, and with no interest in seeking permission. While studio executives expected their actresses to float across red carpets in silk gowns and fragile smiles, Hepburn walked through the world in crisp trousers, worn loafers, and shirts that looked borrowed from a man's closet. She did not wear makeup unless the role demanded it. She pulled her hair back without caring whether it softened her appearance. When a costume designer tried to force a frilly dress on her, she famously hid the garment, refusing to be dressed like someone she was not. Her style was not rebellion for shock value. It was authenticity made visible, a declaration that a woman could define herself in ways no industry memo could revise. Reporters, bewildered by her candor, often tried to corner her with questions about femininity, relationships, expectations. Hepburn met them with a sharp wit that cut through pretense. She dismissed gossip as noise, refused to answer questions she found silly, and engaged only when the conversation held meaning. To the press, she was difficult. To herself, she was merely honest. She once said, with that now legendary clarity, "If you obey all the rules, you miss all the fun." But what she truly meant was that obedience was not a requirement for greatness. Behind all of this steel was a discipline so intense it bordered on monastic. Hepburn's days were structured with the precision of an athlete. Early morning cold swims, hours of tennis, golf sessions that demanded unwavering focus. She kept her body powerful, her instincts sharp, her energy always moving forward. She read voraciously, philosophy, politics, literature, feeding a mind that refused to stagnate. She believed that intelligence made a woman dangerous in the best possible way. And while other stars lived surrounded by assistants, publicists, and carefully curated entourages, Hepburn lived without pretense. She cut her own grass, repaired fences, scrubbed floors, and drove herself wherever she needed to go. Her Connecticut home was not a sanctuary for glamour, but a place where she could be entirely human. She wanted no pedestal, no throne, no distance from the real texture of life. Fame might have followed her like a shadow, but she never allowed it to define her. Perhaps the most radical act of all was her refusal to let Hollywood dictate the narrative of her womanhood. She rejected the idea that marriage was her destiny, that motherhood was a requirement, or that softness was the measure of femininity. She constructed her identity from her own blueprint, choosing independence over expectation, self-knowledge over approval. In every decision, how she lived, dressed, spoke, loved, she insisted on belonging first to herself. This defiance did not make her invincible, but it made her unforgettable. It set a standard for generations of women who came after her, women who longed to be seen not as ornaments, but as individuals. Katharine Hepburn did not break the rules for attention. She broke them because the rules were too small to contain her. And by refusing to bend, she changed the shape of what a woman in Hollywood could be. As the decades passed and Hollywood reshaped itself again and again, Katharine Hepburn remained a constant, a figure carved from a rare blend of resilience and truth, a woman whose presence seemed immune to the erosion of time. Yet behind her unyielding spirit was a body slowly surrendering to the weight of age and the quiet persistence of illness. What made her final years so compelling was not the decline itself, but the courage with which she embraced it, refusing pity, refusing despair, and refusing to let fragility strip her of the dignity she had protected her entire life. The trembling in her hands began subtly, like a whisper she tried to ignore, but essential tremor is not a guest that leaves willingly. Soon it marked her movements, softened her gestures, and accompanied her everywhere. For many, illness becomes a shadow to hide from the world, but Hepburn never believed weakness needed to be wrapped in silence. Instead, she accepted it as a part of her journey, acknowledging it without surrendering to it. When a journalist asked about it, she simply shrugged and said, "I shake, so what?" It was not bravado. It was truth spoken with the confidence of someone who had survived storms far more ruthless. Despite her declining health, she continued to work, choosing roles not for glamour but for meaning. Each performance carried the wisdom of a woman who had lived deeply, lost profoundly, and loved with both caution and recklessness. Her voice grew softer, the edges of her physical presence less defined, but the fire that had always lived behind her eyes never dimmed. She carried her strength not in muscles or postures, but in the unwavering refusal to retreat from the world. At her Connecticut home, the sanctuary where she spent her final years, Hepburn lived surrounded not by luxury, but by the simplicity she had always preferred. She tended to her garden, read by the windows where sunlight touched her hands, and welcomed visitors with her usual mixture of warmth and blunt honesty. She did not speak often of mortality, but when she did, it was with a clarity that left no room for fear. She believed that a life lived on one's own terms made death nothing more than an inevitable transition. Her legacy was already secured long before she left the world. 4 Academy Awards, countless iconic roles, and an influence that stretched across generations were only the visible markers of her impact. The deeper legacy, the one felt rather than displayed, lived in the women who dared to speak their minds, who wore their independence proudly, who refused to be shaped by expectations. Hepburn had shown them that a woman could be brilliant without apology, powerful without permission, and complex without explanation. When she passed away in 2003, tributes flooded in from every corner of the world. But the truth was simple. Katharine Hepburn had already achieved a kind of immortality decades earlier. Her voice, her stance, her stubborn brilliance had woven themselves into the fabric of American cinema. She did not belong solely to Hollywood, nor to the audiences who adored her. She belonged to an idea. The idea that a person can shape their own destiny, even in a world determined to mold them into something smaller. Age may have softened her body, and illness may have shaken her hands, but neither ever touched the core of who she was. Katharine Hepburn walked through life with a spine straightened by conviction and a heart protected by honesty. And in doing so, she ensured that time could never truly claim her. In the end, Katharine Hepburn's story is not defined solely by the trophies she won, the films she illuminated, or the rules she tore apart. It is defined by the unmistakable clarity with which she lived, a clarity that told her to walk away when others begged for approval, to speak truth when silence would have been easier, and to cultivate a life guided not by applause, but by authenticity. As time carried her further from the spotlight, her legend only grew more powerful, as if the world finally understood that her greatness had never come from being adored. It had come from being herself. Looking back at her life is like tracing the outline of a woman carved from contradictions, fierce yet vulnerable, disciplined yet restless, private yet unforgettable. She loved deeply but quietly, worked tirelessly without seeking credit, and held herself to standards far higher than those imposed by any studio. Her victories were hard-earned, her battles often invisible, and her choices sometimes misunderstood. Yet every step she took forged a path for generations of women who would follow. Women who longed to be free from expectations, who wanted to live boldly without apology. Hepburn did not pretend to be flawless. She embraced her complexity with the same honesty she brought to every role. And perhaps that is why she remains eternal. Hollywood has known countless stars, but only a few transcend the screen and become part of its soul. Katharine Hepburn is one of them, not because she shone the brightest, but because she burned with a fire entirely her own. Her legacy lingers in every woman who speaks her mind, in every artist who refuses to compromise, and in every life lived with uncompromising truth. Time may have closed the final chapter of her story, But the woman who refused to bend has never stopped standing tall.